So, a very warm welcome to our discussion panel, Europe, a Promised Land. There's a question mark behind the Promised Land. And what will happen in the next 2 hours? I give you a little short agenda. First, we will have some introductory statements by our panelists. To my left, Monika Steinhauser from the Münchner Flüchtlingsrat, or Council for Refugees in Munich. To my right, Larry Macaulay. He is the founder and the editor-in-chief of the Refugee Radio Network. And on the left, Benjamin Seeb of the Project for Democratic Union, which organized this evening and is the host tonight. And we want to thank the PressClub to have us this evening. After these little statements, we will have a discussion here on the panel. And afterwards, we will open up the floor to you, to the audience. And my name is Alexander Wragge. I'm editor of Public Sphere. That's a non-commercial platform for political debates, user-driven in Berlin. And what I want to carry into this debate tonight is a little bit of the Public Sphere spirit. Before we begin, I just want to give you a little intro. Because all of you know that the media is full of refugee and migration issues at the moment. But some facts I think are still important to keep in mind when we talk about this issue. At the moment there are about 60 million people in the world who left their homes. That's the result of the current report of the UN Refugee Commissioner. Most of them are, or a lot of them are children, and this is the biggest amount of people who are migrating or who are fleeing since the Second World War. So this is the big picture we are talking about. And because of the title of this evening, Europe, the Promised Land, I think it's important to know that the role of Europe is not that big in this a big worldwide refugee movement, because the vast majority of people who are fleeing to countries which are not in the EU. 68% are fleeing to developing countries like Pakistan, Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, and of course, as you know, many people flee to Turkey and other countries. So if you see this, Europe is not a promised land for many people. You could say this because of the numbers. I just give you one number. In 2014, just 160,000 people got a legal status in the European Union. So they got asylum or international protection or some of these legal statuses. So this is a really small amount. Sometimes in the debate you could think there are millions and millions of people coming to the European Union, but this is not true really, compared to other countries. Another little input from me, my experience with this debate on this topic that we had on Public Sphere 2 is that we talk about legal circumstances and conditions, about law, about statistics, and what is missing sometimes in the debate is the connection to real people, to human beings who we are talking about. So I think this night is a really good opportunity because we have panelists who are connected, interested, who care about the refugee community, who can speak for them in a way, who work with them, who know their daily lives. So this night we have the voice of refugees in a way too, what is really rare, I think, in the normal mainstream media debate on migration and asylum issues. So that was my intro. Now I really like to give the word to Larry.
Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for inviting me to this event. I thank the Project for Democratic Union for this initiative. We thank the PressClub for hosting us, and we thank you, members of the press and the panel, for coming. The Flüchtling situation. First of all, I am a Flüchtling, and I know where it hurts as a Flüchtling. I know the discrimination. I live it every day in train stations, in the homes, on the streets, in every corner. in Europe. But I will not let this stereotype bring me down or bring people that I work with down. We rise above that. I would like to start by saying the policies that dictates, the thanatopolitics that dictates who should live and who should die, it's a dangerous phenomenon. And we saw what happened earlier this year with the increase in deaths in the Mediterranean, which shouldn't have happened at all in the first place. We should look inwards. We should talk to our political leaders. We put them there. They did not put themselves there. We should express our opinions in our voting rights. When we put these leaders there that decide and play with human life, the minute we stop manufacturing weapons, I think the problems of this world will minimize a little bit. The proliferation of weapons into Africa, Middle East, is creating a catastrophe that we see today. Like the moderator said, Europe is taking a little burden of this catastrophe. The biggest refugee camps in the world are not in Europe. They are in Kenya, the Dadaab refugee camp. They are in Turkey, and they are also in Southeast Asia. Europe, people are coming to the El Dorado called Europe because they believe in the principles and the values of the European system. Those values that have been preached in Africa for many years, those values that have been imposed on us, that before we can help you, you must be democratic. Before we can give you this, you must be this. You must follow the fundamental principles of human rights, which is okay, fair enough. That is why you see an influx of people into Europe. People are coming from Eritrea. People are coming from Syria because of the war. The vacuum in Libya, the insecurity has also fueled people coming from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe. And they now cross the valley of the shadow of death, I call it, the Sahara, the Mediterranean, and they now end up in the jungle called Europe. And most of those things that have been preached to them on the other side are not visible. We've seen police brutality here in Germany, in Hanover, in Düsseldorf, in Italy, in Greece, in Spain. These are European countries who are violating fundamental rights of human beings. I don't know why. So it now brings us to the question of, let us look inwards. The Flüchtling situation that is happening now is the revolution of our time. We started this revolution 4 years ago in Europe. People labeled us as extremists, people labeled us as right-wing elements or left-wing elements, sorry. But we've seen a trend that is moving, and civil society are asking questions. Why are people dying on the waters in Europe? Why are people being shot in Spain? I've seen footages on YouTube and on Facebook of Spanish Guardia shooting immigrants in the water, and some of them died. Nobody has asked questions. We've seen these footages of police brutality, and civil society are now asking questions of, why is this happening at our doorsteps? What can we do to solve it? We must all come together to solve this problem. Because if we shy behind our luxurious life, our good life, and say, okay, it will pass us by, it's not true. The young people that are coming are between the age of 16 and 30 years, and they will come more if we do not find a solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Could you explain us a little bit the Refugee Radio Network? What is the idea behind this?
Well, being a refugee myself and being in Europe myself for the past 4 years, I've been at the forefront of this advocacy for equal rights, social rights in Italy, in Germany. And we found a parallel that was not okay. There was so much censorship in the stories that were coming out of the refugee situation. They were, you see media reports of labeling people as mercenaries, as terrorists, as, you know, I'm not a terrorist. I've never held a weapon in my life. So why will the media now label me as such? And in my travels to different centers and trying to have workshops with newly arrived refugees, they tell me stories. These stories that you see that the BBC, the Dutch of Welle, and all these media houses are picking up now. We were hearing these full stories firsthand, we were recording it on our mobile phones. And we saw raw interviews, raw footages of atrocities even happening in refugee camps in the south of Italy. And I looked at it and I said, nobody's streaming this out, nobody's getting this message out. Then I came together with some colleagues of mine and said, listen, it's high time we set up a platform that gets these voices out. The real stories, the uncensored stories. I do interviews sometimes with NDR and all these big media houses. They come with all these big equipment and record for 4 hours. And when they play it on Panorama, they just give a 3-minute slot. What happened to the rest of the story? So I said, okay. I put the shoes in my legs and I will tell my story my own way. So we created Refugee Radio from that principle of freedom of expression. No censorship, 100%.
Okay. Thank you. So now I'd like to introduce you Monika Steinhaus. And she is Managing Director of the Münchner Flüchtlingsrat. And this institution was founded in 1967. So the Flüchtlingsrat is a parent organization of different refugee initiatives and is kind of a network platform for people who are engaged in this issue. And what does the Flüchtlingsrat? Maybe you can tell us by yourself. What I got is you give advice to voluntary workers who are working with refugee organizations, and you provide help for refugees as well, like, for example, legal advice, right?
Right. Okay. First, I must apologize for my English, which actually is some kind of global pidgin with a heavy German accent, but it'll have to do. And I start with a quotation from a press release of UNHCR from this morning. So, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, said this morning, the world is facing a staggering crisis as the number of forcibly displaced people rises to record numbers. 59.5 million at the end of 2014. Those that think that it doesn't matter, because humanitarian organizations will be there and able to clean up the mess. I think it's important to say that we are no longer able to clean up the mess, he told reporters today in Istanbul. So we from the Munich Refugee Council are a few of those who try to clean up the mess. And I don't speak for the refugees. I don't. The refugees can speak for themselves. So I only speak for the volunteers that try to help the refugees, but also try to keep the political climate here in a positive, still positive way. So prevent it from toppling. Yeah. So this morning, I say something about numbers because if we read the newspaper here, we get the impression that there is a flood of refugees coming into Europe, coming into Germany, coming into Bavaria, coming into Munich, and that's not the truth. So we had 8.3 million new refugees in 2014 globally, and of which 570,800 came to the European Union, which is about 7%. 173,000 came to Germany, which is 30% of the European Union numbers, but only 2% of the global refugees. So we have an internal quota system for refugees, and according to this quota system, Munich has to accommodate or house 1.5% of the refugees coming to Germany, which in 2014 was something like 2,595 refugees. Numbers are rising, so this year Germany thinks there will be about 450,000 refugees coming to Germany, which means about 6,750 for Europe. So if you read Süddeutsche Zeitung lately, there were numbers much higher. I don't know where from they got those, I don't know. So we always try to calm and also say it's 86% of the refugees that are in developing countries. And if you ask people in the streets, which continent do you think most refugees come to Germany? Everyone will say Africa, but that's not true. And it's 80% of the African refugees stay in Africa, and only 20% of the refugees that came to Germany last year came from Africa. But we see the pictures, we see the refugees in the boats, and it's always black faces. It's never Syrian faces. There are refugee boats with full with Syrians because we put up our Fortress Europe walls, and it's no longer, it's hardly possible anymore to come from Turkey to Greece by land. So they have to take the long way to Syria, a dangerous way, and then cross the Mediterranean. We never see those boats with Syrian faces. Why? Because the Syrian refugees are good refugees at the moment. They run away from the war. It's a very cruel war, everyone knows that. And refugees from Africa, those are the poor people. They come because they're hungry, which is absolute nonsense, because if you're poor, you're not coming to Munich, and you're not coming to Europe, you stay put in Africa. It's just, if you're lucky, you go to some neighboring countries. So if you're poor, no chance. So the ideas the people have and get by the media and by the politicians are wrong. And we try to repair that. So it's not easy, but we try. Yeah. And most of the refugees that come will stay. Or even if the politicians say most of them are not real refugees, they have to go back. My experience from 23 years, Munich Refugee Council says most of them will stay. So, and if you look at last year's decisions, and if we look at the decisions that really were based on interviews, like the normal asylum procedure, then we have 50% that got a right to stay in Germany in the first instance, and another 10% by the courts. So 60% were allowed to stay, and the rest stays without being allowed to stay. So we just should face that and stop dreaming of refugees going back. No, they don't. They will stay.
Thank you, Monica. Now I want to introduce Benjamin Seeb. Many of you will know him already. He is Chief Executive Officer of the Project for Democratic Union. Benjamin studied history and political sciences in Munich and Madrid, and in Canada. You studied too, so you are a bit a migrant too sometimes. And what is the Project for Democratic Union? It's a think tank which makes the case for a political union of the Eurozone. So maybe you will ask yourself, why are you talking about this migration issue? But you will explain to us.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much for making the long way from Berlin all the way here to host us today. My perspective differs slightly from my two co-panelists. For the first reason, because I'm not as intimately connected with the situation right here in Munich and with the refugee situation in their everyday lives, and secondly because I don't want to focus as much on the communication aspect of this problem. I think there's probably a lot of truth to what you both emphasize, that there is a lot of miscommunication, and we are indeed no longer to clean up this mess, and I think this explains a lot why we have a lot of this miscommunication. But how did we get in this situation in the first place? How did we get in a situation that we cannot clean up anymore? Why are we lacking the tools? How can we allow a situation to continue and true without talking about it much, where since 2000 28,000 people drowned in the Mediterranean. That is insane. That is our sea, right? That is our European sea. It's not something we can allow to happen. And I think the problem here is mainly structural. The refugee situation is an instance, maybe more than any other, where the global really meets the local. So you have these incidents and these very human stories, which are very up close and personal. But to really understand how we get there, we have to really broaden the perspective massively. And as you said, most of these people do not come from Africa. I think there's 15 million people coming from sub-Saharan Africa in total, but there's more people coming from Syria and from Afghanistan, for example. Syria and Afghanistan are both countries where we have decided at one point or another either to intervene in our foreign policy or not to intervene. So the first intervention in Afghanistan obviously cannot have been very successful if we have still 3.7 million Afghans displaced. And the situation in Syria certainly wasn't helped much by European foreign policy. The same is true, the same political deficits are true not only for our foreign policy, but also how we deal as Europeans in our cooperation when we address the management of the immigrant crisis. Just a couple of days ago, France actually rejected this idea of quotas, right? And they did this, although it came from Italy, and you would think these two countries really have a shared interest in that respect, much more so than they do with other members of the European Union, especially in Eastern Europe, where there are pointedly different foreign policy interests, and this conflict is somewhat understandable. The Poles care about Russia, and France and Italy obviously care more about the Mediterranean, and still they could not come to an agreement. So we have a massive disconnect and a massive failure to articulate a common and sensible foreign policy strategy and a common and sensible strategy for managing these types of crises. Germany plays a very special role in this. For the last decade or so, ever since the Eastern enlargement, Germany is very comfortably and snugly surrounded by France. So we don't really care about foreign policy as much, and you mentioned this, there's not actually that many refugees coming to Germany via the Mediterranean or via Turkey, which has closed off as well. So there's a huge lack of solidarity, and there's a huge lack of leadership, which not solely from Germany, but it should in part at least come also from Germany. So we lack the institutions to deal with these crises. We lack the institutions, and we lack the legitimacy at this certain point in time to create the institutions that we would actually need to solve this crisis. We would need a common foreign policy that deserves the name, that clearly articulates our interests, that is capable of deciding democratically what we do in which part of the world. That does not mean that we should become solely interventionist. That does not mean we should just copy the Americans. But it does mean taking seriously a situation like in Syria and thinking strategically of what we can do there. It also means, and that I want to close with that, sending one ship from the perspective of Germany to aid Italy with a rescue operation. That is ridiculous. That is not a policy. That is PR. So the first thing we actually need to do is understand this humanitarian crisis that is happening in the Mediterranean right now and solve this first. Afterwards, deal with the bigger picture.